Hello, welcome to my bookshelf. I'm Justine Brown. Today the topic is Sir Thomas More, who wrote Utopia. Sir Thomas More gave us the word utopia. When we invoke utopia, we usually mean a perfect society. But in the wake of the 20th century's many, mostly spectacularly failed social experiments, both large and small, we can mean naive prescription for disaster. When the English humanist coined the word in the early 16th century to name his imaginary island republic, he was playing on two Greek words. One means a good place, the other means no place or nowhere. Our current usage preserves the first sense, but we have lost the second, equally important sense. We might do well to remember it, particularly when we try to design a more perfect world. There is a playful oscillation beating at the heart of utopia, a suggestion that the good place is no place at all. The perfect society does not exist. Or we might say moments of perfection are fragile and fleeting. The voyage to utopia is fraught with peril, as the example of totalitarian society shows us. We may want to improve society. Let us do so carefully and wisely, remaining tethered to what we actually know about human thriving. Sir Thomas More would have agreed. It is perhaps an irony that the author of Utopia, the man people often suppose to be a great reformer, has gone down in history for having died for rejecting one of history's most dramatic political reforms. More, formerly a Chancellor of England, held out against Henry VIII when the king broke ties with the Vatican, appointing himself head of the newly created Anglican Church and granting himself a divorce from Catherine of Aragon in order to marry Anne Boleyn, the divorce that the Pope would not give him. More, a devout Catholic and concerned about the dangers of one person having unlimited power, not just to himself or other courtiers, but to the nation as a whole, could not agree. He was executed for it in 1535. The object of all this upheaval, Anne Boleyn, followed him to the scaffold only 1 year later. More did not live to see the drastic changes that England underwent as a result of Henry's policies, changes so violent that they prompted this later characterization of the king by Charles Dickens. He was a blot of blood and grease upon the history of England. What made the man who defied Henry VIII and faced down imprisonment, loss, and a terrible death? He was born in London in 1478. From childhood he was known for serene good humor and was a lifelong prankster, a player of practical jokes. His father and grandfather were lawyers. His father would fund only a law career. More attended an excellent grammar school, St. Anthony's in Threadneedle Street in the city of London. So that his son might throw himself into his studies and learn frugality, More Senior withheld all pocket money. Later the boy apprenticed to John Morton, Chancellor and Archbishop of Canterbury. "This child here waiting at the table will prove a marvelous man," said Morton of his charge. During theatre performances at Lambeth Palace, sometimes young Thomas would amuse people by stepping into the scene among the actors and improvising. He also wrote humorous poetry in English, Latin, and Greek. His ready wit and towardness soon gained him a place at Oxford. Having mastered ancient Greek in 3 years, More joined his close friend and fellow humanist Erasmus in translating the comic dialogues of Lucian. Immersed in classical languages, Platonic philosophy, poetry, and theology, he thought about becoming a monk and went to live for a time at a Carthusian monastery. Monastic life offered almost total devotion to study. Interestingly, considering what later happened to English monks in general, and this order in particular, they were violently suppressed by Henry VIII, it seems More was destined to suffer for his faith, no matter which path he took. Erasmus reveals that More's father threatened to disinherit him if he chose the monk's life. But More had decided, in any case, that celibacy would be impossible for him, and resolved to marry. His father convinced him to return to London to study civil law at the Inns of Court, and More was called to the bar in 1501. He continued to write a great deal of poetry, some of it risky political satires on figures including the king, and his profile raised dramatically by giving a series of prestigious public lectures on St. Augustine's City of God. These proved to be very popular. Studying classical and Christian authors helped him to formulate the political philosophy that would animate his career. It rested on the idea that each person is basically free, and that Parliament is therefore a higher authority than the king. As he wrote, "Any person who has command over many persons owes his authority to those he commands." More also believed that good society was founded on friendship. We are each limited by imperfections wrought by original sin, and can only flourish when assisted by friends who complete us. For More, who enjoyed many warm and enduring friendships, we are all like that, spiritually. Erasmus wrote that More himself was born and framed for friendship, combining real wisdom with charm of character. More became enthusiastically engaged in London life. As a lawyer, he worked on humble and yet crucial projects, such as one to improve the sewers. His practice grew huge. He became an MP. He married Jane Colt in 1505. They had 4 children in quick succession, but Jane died suddenly. More was heartbroken, but within a year he had married again to a considerably older woman called Alice Middleton. This proved to be a good decision, since Alice was a loving stepmother to his young children. The household grew and became immensely productive. Eventually, More and Alice were housing his children and their spouses, his grandchildren, 2 adopted daughters, together with servants, including, characteristically for More, a fool. He ran a school for his family, his wards, some friends, and some maidservants as well. He believed in education for men and women alike, an attitude that influenced noble families of the time. He hosted his friend Erasmus, who wrote the celebrated work In Praise of Folly while living at the More home. The painter Holbein the Younger came to stay. While he was there, he drew and painted More alone and with his large family. Holbein captured the atmosphere, which combined studiousness, reverence, and merriment. More, for his part, loved deadpan humor. Family and friends never knew when he was joking and when he was serious. Family life and work left little time for himself, by which he meant learning and writing, so More had to steal time, as he put it, from sleep and food. It was in this period that he completed, among other writings, Utopia. It made him famous internationally, and prompted a flurry of invitations to court from Henry VIII. The first edition of Utopia, written in Latin, was later translated into English, appeared in 1516. The inveterate prankster More pretends to have simply jotted down the account of a traveler he met while with a friend. This traveler, Raphael Hythloday, claims to have happened upon the island of Utopia while exploring the New World. Hythloday tells More that the island republic of Utopia has 54 identical, clean, and beautiful cities. Money is non-existent, everything is shared. Gold is considered ridiculous, as are silver and gems. These things are used to fashion chains for prisoners, such prisoners as there are in a country where theft is meaningless. Urban utopians live in hierarchical communities of 40 adults and their children. Each house has a huge garden and a communal dining room. Everybody works, but those who display special talents also pursue knowledge. Before they marry, young couples are expected to survey one another stark naked, presumably to prevent disappointment, but it adds another touch of comedy. Utopians disapprove of war, but are skilled soldiers. Religious tolerance reigns in Utopia, while the majority are monotheists. There are hints that this might be the lost island of Atlantis. Hythloday celebrates utopian customs, but the More character raises objections. Why, he asks, for example, would people work sufficiently hard under communism in the absence of incentives. Any prescriptive quality in the book is further offset by a hoaxing playfulness typical of More. Utopia references later imaginative efforts to render the perfect commonwealth, such as Plato's Republic. As the poet laureate of Utopia tells us in a dedicatory verse, Plato's Republic now I claim, to match or beat at its own game. This is More at his most facetious, since he revered Plato and was known for his personal modesty. The book is also a parody travelogue. Early editions came complete with a map of the fictional territory, much like a real travelogue would. More's jesting pretext is that Utopia is a report, a description of an actual country beyond the horizon. We learn that it lies somewhere in the New World. When Hythloday gives them its exact location, there is a loud coughing in the public house where they sit. More's Utopia spoofs the travelogues which were emerging in the wake of Europe's discovery of the Americas. Its fictitious explorer, Raphael, claims to have voyaged with Amerigo Vespucci, the man for whom America is named. It is important to remember that the New World was still mostly uncharted, Christopher Columbus having reached the West Indies in 1492, scarcely 20 years previously. It was fresh in people's minds. Nobody in Europe knew what lay beyond the tiny portion of America that had been mapped, and More was toying with people's sense that anything might yet be discovered. Some expected to find the literal Garden of Eden in the terra incognita of the Americas. Others, dodging sea monsters and mermaids, soon became involved in the hunt for El Dorado, the fabled city of gold. The encounter with the unknown had enhanced Europeans' sense of what might be possible, and More was teasing them for it. More would have expected his readers to get the nowhere joke in the title right away, since educated people in that era learned Greek in addition to Latin. They would see the oscillation between a good place and no place at once. The book is studded with similar linguistic jokes. Many of these stand untranslated in many English editions, so readers have been left in the dark. All remind us that Utopia is an invention. The narrator's name, Raphael Hythloday, translates as purveyor of nonsense. The poet laureate of Utopia is a certain Mr. Windbag Nonsense's sister's son. The capital city's name adds up to Air Castle. The name of a river means no water, and so on. More reminds us at every turn that the imaginary commonwealth of Utopia is just that, imaginary. With Utopia, More inaugurated a genre, inspiring writers ranging from Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, Jonathan Swift, and William Morris through to the dystopias of Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. More gave us the language to describe the ideal commonwealth, and his example continues to inspire writers and other artists from across the social spectrum. Ultimately, Utopia concerns the nowhere that is the imagination itself, an infinite space with no material reality. It is a fiction about fiction. There are traces of Utopia on the maps of Wonderland, Oz, Narnia, and Middle-earth. More points to the power of the human imagination, to dream, to invent, to speculate. At the same time, he warns us lightly against credulousness. More reminds us that utopias remain, after all, castles in the air. What has been left out of the contemporary understanding of Utopia is its inherent humor, an irony that was entirely typical of its playful creator. It starts with the title shimmering between a good place and no place. More prompts us to reimagine our life together. At the same time, he invites us to laugh at our pipe dreams. There is a warning at the core of Utopia. The perfect place does not lie in this world. We would do well to heed it. Thanks for listening, and please share and like, and I invite your comments below.